In a small apartment on the third floor of an old building in Tokyo, an 8-year-old boy sat cross-legged on the worn tatami mat. His name was Kenji, and in his hands he held something that most people would throw away without a second thought. It was a piece of cardboard, carefully flattened and marked with black lines. To anyone else it looked like trash. To Kenji it was a piano. He had drawn the keys himself, measuring each one with a ruler borrowed from school. 88 keys, just like a real piano. The white keys were left plain, and he had colored the black keys with a marker that was now running dry. Some of the lines were a bit crooked and the cardboard was getting soft from being touched so many times, but Kenji didn't mind. Every afternoon when he came home from school, this cardboard became his whole world. His fingers moved across the drawn keys with surprising grace. There was no sound, of course. No beautiful music filled the tiny apartment, but in Kenji's mind he could hear every note perfectly. His eyes would close and he would lose himself in melodies that only he could hear. Sometimes it was Mozart, sometimes it was Beethoven, and sometimes it was music he made up himself, pouring out of his imagination like water from a spring. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. His mother wouldn't be home for another 3 hours. She worked at a convenience store downtown, taking the late shift because it paid a little more. Before that, she cleaned offices in the morning. Kenji rarely saw her except for a brief moment at breakfast and late at night, when she would tuck him into bed smelling of cleaning products and exhaustion. It hadn't always been like this. 2 years ago, his father was still alive. He remembered his father's laugh, the way he would ruffle Kenji's hair when he came home from work. His father had worked in construction, building the tall glass towers that seemed to be sprouting all over Tokyo. One rainy afternoon, there was an accident. The details were fuzzy in Kenji's mind, but he remembered his mother's face when she got the phone call. He remembered the funeral, the way the rain fell on the black umbrellas and how his mother's hand had trembled in his. After that, everything changed. They had to move from their nice apartment to this smaller one. His mother started working 2 jobs. The television was sold. So were most of their belongings. But the hardest loss for Kenji was the keyboard his father had bought him for his 6th birthday. It wasn't a real piano, just a small electronic keyboard with plastic keys. But Kenji had loved it more than any toy. They had to sell it to pay for rent. When things get better, his mother had promised, tears in her eyes, we'll get you another one. An even better one. Kenji had nodded, trying to be brave. He was only 6 then, but he understood. He never complained. He never asked for toys or games like the other kids at school. He just wanted to play music again. That's when he made his cardboard piano. His teacher at school, Mrs. Tanaka, had noticed something special about him during music class. When she played notes on the old piano in the classroom, Kenji could identify each one without looking. She would play a chord, and he would tell her exactly which notes she was playing. The other children couldn't do this. Even Mrs. Tanaka, who'd been teaching for 20 years, was amazed. You have perfect pitch, she had told him one day after class. Do you know how rare that is? 1 in 10,000 people have this gift. Kenji didn't feel special. He just knew what he heard. It seemed normal to him, like knowing that the sky is blue or that winter is cold. But Mrs. Tanaka said it meant he could become a great musician someday. She let him stay after school sometimes to play the classroom piano. Those 30 minutes twice a week were the happiest moments of Kenji's life. But it wasn't enough. His fingers itched to play more, to practice, to improve. That's why he made the cardboard piano. At night before bed, he would go to the library and study piano books. He memorized the fingering for scales and arpeggios. He read about the great composers and their masterpieces. And then he would come home and practice on his silent instrument, his fingers building muscle memory for keys that didn't exist. The other children at school didn't understand him. During recess, they would play soccer or tag, running and laughing in the schoolyard. Kenji would sit under a tree with a music book studying. Some kids thought he was strange. A few called him names. Why are you always reading boring books? They would ask. Come play with us. But Kenji couldn't explain it to them. How could he tell them about the music that lived inside his head? How could he make them understand that when he closed his eyes he could hear entire symphonies? They would just laugh at him. The poor kid who pretended to play a piano made of cardboard. There was one boy, though, who was particularly mean. His name was Takeshi, and he went to the expensive private school across the street. Sometimes the two schools would share the playground, and that's when the trouble usually started. Takeshi always had the newest toys, the best clothes, and a pride that made him look down on anyone who had less. He had seen Kenji with his music books and had made it his mission to make fun of him. "Hey, poor boy," Takeshi would call out. "Still pretending to be a musician? My family has 3 pianos, real ones. Not toys for babies." Kenji would ignore him, but the words stung. It wasn't fair that some people had everything while others had nothing. But life wasn't fair. His mother had taught him that. All you could do was work hard and hope for better days. On this particular afternoon, as Kenji practiced on his cardboard piano, he didn't know that his life was about to change. He didn't know that in just a few weeks he would face the biggest challenge of his young life. He didn't know that Takeshi was planning something cruel, something that was meant to humiliate him in front of everyone. All Kenji knew was the music. His fingers danced across the silent keys, and in his mind, he played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was his favorite piece, sad and beautiful at the same time, like his life. The melody flowed through his thoughts, each note perfect and clear. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the small apartment in shades of orange and gold. In a few hours, his mother would come home tired but smiling, and they would eat a simple dinner of rice and vegetables. She would ask about his day, and he would tell her about school, carefully leaving out the parts about being lonely or being teased. And then, before bed, she would kiss his forehead and whisper the same thing she always did. "Your father would be so proud of you." Kenji believed her. Somewhere, he hoped his father was watching. He hoped his father could hear the music too, the silent symphonies that filled their small apartment. And he hoped that someday, somehow, he would get the chance to play on a real piano again, to make real music that everyone could hear, not just him. He didn't know it yet, but that chance was coming. And when it did, it would come in the strangest, most unexpected way possible. The announcement came on a Monday morning during school assembly. Principal Watanabe stood at the front of the hall, his voice echoing through the speakers as hundreds of students sat in neat rows on the floor. Kenji was in the back, as always, listening quietly. "This year's cultural festival will be special," the principal said, his face beaming with pride. "We have been invited to collaborate with Sakura Academy across the street. Their students will join us for performances and activities." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sakura Academy was the most expensive private school in the district. Everyone knew about it. The students there wore crisp uniforms and carried designer bags. Their parents drove expensive cars and worked in tall office buildings. It was a different world, one that most of the children in Kenji's school could only imagine. "This is a wonderful opportunity for cultural exchange," Principal Watanabe continued. "I expect everyone to be on their best behavior and to show our guests the warm spirit of our school." Kenji felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew exactly who would be coming from Sakura Academy. Takeshi would be there, probably with his group of friends who liked to laugh at others. The thought made Kenji want to stay home on the day of the festival, but he knew his mother would be disappointed. She always encouraged him to participate in school events, even though they both knew he couldn't afford the fancy costumes or props that other kids brought. The weeks leading up to the festival were busy. The school was decorated with colorful banners and paper lanterns. Students practiced dances, prepared science exhibitions, and rehearsed skits. Mrs. Tanaka organized a small music performance, and she asked Kenji if he wanted to participate. "I would love to hear you play something," she said kindly. "You have such talent," but Kenji shook his head. "I don't have a piano to practice on," he said quietly. "I would need to rehearse properly, and I can only use the classroom piano twice a week for 30 minutes. Mrs. Tanaka's face fell with sympathy. She wanted to help, but the school budget was tight. The classroom piano was old and needed tuning, and there was no money to buy time at a proper practice facility. She patted Kenji's shoulder and told him to let her know if he changed his mind. The day of the festival arrived with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze. The schoolyard was transformed into a carnival of activity. There were food stalls, game booths, and a small stage where performances would take place. Parents wandered around taking pictures while children ran excitedly from one attraction to another. That's when they arrived. The students from Sakura Academy came in a chartered bus, stepping out in their pristine uniforms like celebrities arriving at a premiere. Teachers from both schools greeted each other with polite bows. The Sakura Academy students looked around with expressions that ranged from curiosity to barely concealed superiority. Takeshi was among them, of course. He was taller now, his hair perfectly styled, and he walked with the confidence of someone who had never known hardship. His friends followed him like a pack, laughing at private jokes and glancing around at the modest decorations with smirks on their faces. Kenji tried to make himself invisible. He volunteered to help at the origami booth in a corner of the yard, far from the main activities. He taught younger children how to fold paper cranes, his hands moving with the same precise grace he used on his cardboard piano. For a while, everything was fine. The festival was loud and busy, and Kenji thought he might make it through the day without any trouble. But then came the joint rehearsal. Both schools had arranged for their music performers to practice together in the school gymnasium. It was meant to be a collaborative session, where students could learn from each other and prepare for the evening's main performance. Mrs. Tanaka had encouraged all her music students to attend, even if they weren't performing, just to watch and learn. Kenji hesitated at the gymnasium doors. He could hear piano music coming from inside, rich and full of life. Someone from Sakura Academy was playing, and they were good. Really good. His fingers twitched with longing. He wanted to play so badly it hurt. "Come on, Kenji," Mrs. Tanaka called out, spotting him at the entrance. "Don't be shy. Come watch." He had no choice but to enter. The gymnasium was filled with students from both schools. At the front, a girl from Sakura Academy was finishing a piece by Liszt, her fingers flying across a beautiful grand piano that had been brought in specially for the festival. When she finished, everyone applauded. She stood and bowed gracefully, her face flushed with pride. Kenji found a spot in the back and sat down, trying to be as small and unnoticeable as possible. He watched as student after student performed. Some were excellent, others were just okay, but all of them had one thing he didn't have. They had access to real instruments. They had lessons with professional teachers. They had opportunities. That's when he heard his name. Not his full name, but enough to make his blood run cold. "Isn't that the kid?" Someone whispered loudly. "The one who thinks he can play piano?" Kenji's head snapped up. Takeshi was standing with a group of his friends, pointing in his direction. They were talking among themselves, but their voices carried across the quiet gymnasium. Other students started turning to look. "Which one?" one of Takeshi's friends asked. "The poor kid in the back," Takeshi said, not bothering to lower his voice now. "I've seen him reading music books during recess. Acts like he's some kind of genius." Heat rushed to Kenji's face. He wanted to stand up and leave, but his legs wouldn't move. It was like being trapped in a nightmare. Mrs. Tanaka noticed the commotion and started walking over, but Takeshi was already moving. He strode across the gymnasium with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his life. His friends followed, and soon a small crowd had formed. Even the teachers were watching now, uncertain about what was happening. "Hey," Takeshi said, standing directly in front of Kenji. "I heard you're really good at piano, that you have some kind of special gift." Kenji looked up at him, his heart pounding. "I just like music," he said quietly. "Just like music?" Takeshi laughed. "That's not what I heard. I heard you tell people you can play anything, that you have perfect pitch or something." "Mrs. Tanaka said that, not me," Kenji replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd was growing. Students from both schools had stopped what they were doing to watch. There was something magnetic about confrontation, something that drew people in even when they knew it was wrong. Takeshi's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Well, if you're so talented, why don't you show us? We'd all love to hear you play." "I don't want to perform," Kenji said, looking down at his hands. "Why not?" "Are you scared?" Takeshi pressed. "Or maybe you were lying this whole time. Maybe you can't actually play at all." "That's enough," Mrs. Tanaka said, finally reaching them. "Leave him alone, young man." But Takeshi wasn't finished. He had an idea, and the gleam in his eye told Kenji that nothing good was about to happen. Takeshi turned and walked toward a door at the side of the gymnasium. It led to the storage room where the school kept old equipment and broken furniture. "I know just the piano for him," Takeshi called out, and his friends burst into laughter because they understood something that Kenji didn't yet. Takeshi disappeared into the storage room and emerged a moment later, pushing something on wheels. It was a piano, old and battered. Its wood finish cracked and faded. But it was worse than old. It was broken. Even from a distance, Kenji could see that several keys were missing entirely. Others hung at odd angles. The piano looked like it had been forgotten for decades, left to decay in the darkness of the storage room. The laughter spread through the crowd like wildfire. Even some students from Kenji's own school were giggling now, caught up in the spectacle. Only a few faces showed sympathy, but they remained silent, unwilling to stand up against the popular boy from the rich school. Takeshi pushed the broken piano into the center of the gymnasium. The wheels squeaked and wobbled. He patted the bench, sending up a small cloud of dust. "Here you go," Takeshi announced, his voice dripping with false politeness. "A piano just for you. Now you can show everyone how talented you really are. Play us something beautiful." The gymnasium had fallen completely silent now. Even the teachers seemed frozen, unsure of how to handle the situation. Some looked angry at Takeshi's cruelty, but the moment had taken on a life of its own. Everyone was waiting to see what Kenji would do. Would he run away? Would he cry? Would he admit that he couldn't play, and that the rumors about his talent were just the imaginings of a poor boy who dreamed too big? Kenji sat perfectly still, his mind racing. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, his classmates, his teachers, strangers from another school. All waiting, all watching. This was the moment Takeshi had been planning. The perfect humiliation. A broken piano for a broken dream. Mrs. Tanaka moved to intervene, to tell everyone to go back to rehearsing, to end this cruel game. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened. Kenji stood up. He didn't run away. He didn't cry. He walked slowly, steadily, toward the broken piano in the center of the gymnasium, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, but his face remained calm. If they wanted a performance, he would give them one. Not because Takeshi demanded it, but because the music inside him needed to come out. It had been silent for too long. Kenji's footsteps echoed in the silent gymnasium. Every step felt like it took forever. The broken piano sat in the middle of the floor like a wounded animal, its missing keys like gaps in a smile. He could hear people whispering behind him, but he didn't turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on the instrument ahead. When he reached the piano, he stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Up close, it was even worse than he had thought. The wood was scratched and dented. Some keys were missing completely, leaving empty spaces that showed the dusty hammers underneath. Other keys were stuck, frozen in place by years of neglect. The strings inside looked rusty and broken. This wasn't just an old piano. This was a dead piano. Takeshi's voice cut through the silence. "What's wrong?" Having second thoughts, his friend snickered. Kenji reached out and touched one of the keys gently. It made a dull, lifeless thunk. He pressed another. This one produced a sound, but it was so out of tune it barely resembled a musical note. He tried a third key, but it wouldn't press down at all. It was completely stuck. His hands began to tremble. Not from fear, but from something else. Anger, maybe. Or sadness, or both. This broken piano reminded him of everything he had lost. His father. Their old apartment. The small keyboard he used to play. All the things that had been taken away from him through no fault of his own. But then a strange calm washed over him. He thought about his cardboard piano at home. That wasn't a real instrument either, but it had taught him something important. Music wasn't just about the instrument. It was about something deeper, something that lived inside him. He remembered his father's words spoken on the day they had bought that first keyboard. They had been in the music store, and Kenji had been nervous about playing in front of the salesperson. His father had knelt down, looked him in the eyes, and said something he would never forget. "The piano is just a tool, son. The real music comes from your heart. If you play with your heart, even the worst piano in the world will sound beautiful." Kenji took a deep breath and sat down on the dusty bench. He adjusted his position, just like Mrs. Tanaka had taught him. Proper posture, shoulders relaxed, hands curved naturally. The bench was too high for him, and his feet barely touched the floor, but he didn't complain. He lifted the fallboard, revealing the full extent of the damage. Nearly a third of the keys were either missing or broken. The ones that remained looked like scattered teeth. For a moment, doubt flickered through his mind. What if he couldn't do this? What if he failed in front of everyone? But then he closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he could see his cardboard piano. He could feel his fingers moving across the drawn keys. He could hear the music that had always existed only in his imagination. And suddenly he understood. This broken piano wasn't any different from his cardboard one. Both were imperfect. Both were incomplete. But both could make music if he believed they could. He opened his eyes and placed his fingers on the keys. The gymnasium was so quiet he could hear people breathing. He could feel their doubt, their curiosity, their expectation that he would fail. Even Mrs. Tanaka looked worried, as if she wanted to stop this before he got hurt. Kenji decided to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was his favorite piece, the one he had practiced 1,000 times on his cardboard piano. But he knew he couldn't play it normally. Too many keys were missing. He would have to change it, adapt it, reimagine it. His fingers touched the keys and he began to play. The first note that came out was wrong, horribly out of tune, like a cry from a wounded bird. Someone in the crowd laughed. But Kenji didn't stop. He pressed the next key and the next, feeling his way through the wreckage of the instrument. Some keys produced sound. Some didn't. Some made noises that barely resembled music at all. But something remarkable began to happen. Kenji started to work around the broken keys. When a note he needed was missing, he found another note that could replace it. When a key was stuck, he skipped it and adjusted the melody. He was composing in real time, rewriting Chopin's masterpiece to fit the limitations of this broken piano. His fingers moved with increasing confidence, dancing around the gaps like water flowing around stones in a river. The melody began to emerge. It wasn't exactly Chopin anymore. It was something new, something different. But it was beautiful in its own strange way. The missing notes created unexpected silences that made the existing notes more powerful. The out-of-tune keys added a haunting quality that the original piece never had. People in the gymnasium stopped whispering. The laughter died away. Heads that had been turned to make jokes to friends slowly turned back to watch. Because what they were witnessing was impossible, yet it was happening right in front of them. Mrs. Tanaka's hand went to her mouth. She had known Kenji was talented, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. He wasn't just playing a broken piano. He was bringing it back to life. Kenji's eyes were closed again. He was lost in the music now, no longer thinking about the crowd or about Takeshi or about proving anything to anyone. He was just playing, pouring everything he felt into the keys, all his loneliness, all his longing, all the love he had for his mother and his memories of his father. It all flowed through his fingers and into the wounded instrument. The broken piano began to sing, not with the voice of a grand concert piano, but with something more human, more real. It sang with all its imperfections, all its damage, all its years of being forgotten, and somehow that made the music even more moving. Kenji reached a part of the piece where too many keys in a row were missing. There was no way to play the original melody. For a split second he hesitated. Then, without thinking, he began to improvise. His grandmother had taught him old Japanese folk songs when he was very small, before she passed away. He wove fragments of those melodies into Chopin's music, creating something that belonged to both worlds and to neither. A girl in the front row started to cry, though she didn't know why. A teacher who had taught for 30 years felt chills run down his spine. Even some of Takeshi's friends looked uncomfortable, as if they suddenly realized they were part of something they didn't understand. The music swelled and fell, painting pictures in the air. Kenji's hands moved faster now, more confident, more free. He found rhythms in the broken notes. He found harmony in the discord. He turned every limitation into a possibility. The piano that couldn't make proper music was making music more honest than any perfect instrument could produce. Outside, people who had been walking past the gymnasium stopped. They could hear something unusual coming from inside. Parents who had been at the festival food stalls turned their heads. The sound was muffled by the walls, but it carried an emotion so strong that even strangers felt drawn to it. Inside, the performance continued. Kenji was completely absorbed now, existing in a place where only he and the music lived. His small fingers worked tirelessly, pulling beauty from destruction. The broken piano responded to his touch like it had been waiting years for someone who understood it, someone who didn't need perfection to make art. The piece was reaching its conclusion. Kenji had restructured the ending to work with the available keys, turning Chopin's gentle fade into something more abrupt, but equally powerful. He played the final phrase softly, carefully, making each note count. The last key he pressed was badly out of tune, but somehow in that moment, it was exactly the right note. His hands lifted from the keys. The sound faded into the air, leaving behind only echoes and silence. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The gymnasium was frozen in time, caught between disbelief and understanding. They had come expecting to laugh at a poor boy's failure. Instead, they had witnessed something they couldn't explain. Something that made them question everything they thought they knew about music, about talent, about what was possible. Kenji opened his eyes. His hands were shaking now, and he felt exhausted, like he had run a marathon. He looked down at the broken piano, at the keys that had somehow given him their voice. He wanted to say thank you to it, but that seemed silly. Then the gymnasium exploded with sound. The applause started small, just one person clapping, then another. Then suddenly everyone was on their feet, and the sound was like thunder rolling through the gymnasium. Students who had been laughing minutes ago were now clapping so hard their hands hurt. Teachers who had watched quietly were wiping tears from their eyes. Even the janitor, who had been mopping the hallway outside, came to the door to see what all the noise was about. Kenji sat frozen on the bench, overwhelmed. He had never heard applause before. Not like this. Not for him. He looked around at all the faces, some smiling, some crying, all of them looking at him like he was someone important, someone special. It was almost too much to take in. Mrs. Tanaka was the first to reach him. She bent down and hugged him tightly, not caring that other people were watching. "That was incredible," she whispered. "Absolutely incredible." Students began crowding around, all talking at once. "How did you do that? Where did you learn to play like that? Can you teach me?" The questions came so fast that Kenji couldn't answer any of them. He just nodded and smiled, still trying to understand what had just happened. But then the crowd parted and Takeshi stood there. The gymnasium got quieter. Everyone remembered why Kenji had been at that piano in the first place. They remembered Takeshi's cruel joke, his mocking voice, the way he had tried to humiliate someone who had never done anything to him. Now Takeshi stood face to face with Kenji, and nobody knew what would happen next. Takeshi's face was red, not from anger but from shame. His friends stood behind him, but they weren't laughing anymore. They looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to be anywhere else but there. For the first time in his life, Takeshi had no idea what to say. Finally, he took a deep breath. Then in front of everyone, he bowed. Not a casual nod, but a deep, formal bow. The kind of bow that means real respect in Japanese culture. The kind that admits you were wrong. "I'm sorry," Takeshi said, his voice barely steady. "I was cruel and stupid. I thought I was better than you because my family has money and yours doesn't. But you have something I'll never have, no matter how many pianos my father buys. You have real talent, real gift, and I tried to destroy it because I was jealous." The gymnasium was silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. People were witnessing something rare, something honest. Kenji didn't know what to say. Part of him was still angry. Part of him wanted to tell Takeshi that his words had hurt, that being poor was already hard enough without people making fun of him for it. But when he looked at Takeshi's face, he saw something genuine there. Real regret. Real shame. "It's okay," Kenji said quietly. "Thank you for apologizing." Takeshi straightened up, but he didn't walk away. "It's not okay," he said. "What I did was wrong, but I want to make it right somehow. I just don't know how." Before anyone could respond, a voice came from the back of the gymnasium. "Excuse me. May I speak?" Everyone turned. An elderly woman was standing near the entrance. She was small and elegant, dressed in a simple but expensive-looking dress. Her hair was white, pulled back in a neat bun. Nobody had noticed her come in during the performance. She walked forward with measured steps, using a cane but not really needing it. Principal Watanabe rushed over, looking flustered. "Professor Nakamura, we didn't know you were here." "This is such an honor." The name rippled through the crowd. Even Kenji had heard of Professor Nakamura. She was famous in Japan, one of the country's greatest pianists. She had performed in concert halls around the world and had taught at the most prestigious music conservatory in Tokyo for 40 years. What was she doing at a small school cultural festival? Professor Nakamura smiled gently. "I was visiting my niece at Sakura Academy for the festival when I heard music coming from this building. Very unusual music. I had to investigate." She looked directly at Kenji. "Young man, what is your name?" "Kenji Takahashi," he answered, his voice small. "Kenji Takahashi," she repeated as if tasting the name. "How long have you been playing piano?" I don't have a piano, Kenji admitted. I practice on cardboard. Professor Nakamura's eyebrows rose. Cardboard? Mrs. Tanaka stepped forward. He draws piano keys on cardboard and practices on that. He can only use our classroom piano twice a week for 30 minutes. But he has perfect pitch and an extraordinary musical memory. The professor walked closer to Kenji, studying him carefully. What you just did was remarkable. You didn't just play that broken instrument. You understood it. You adapted to its limitations in real time, composing as you went. That requires not just talent, but deep musical intelligence. She paused. Who is your teacher? Mrs. Tanaka helps me when she can, Kenji said. But mostly I teach myself from library books. Professor Nakamura shook her head slowly, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. You taught yourself to play like that from books? She turned to Principal Watanabe. This child is wasting away here. Not because your school isn't good, but because he needs resources you cannot provide. He needs proper training, daily practice, exposure to great teachers and musicians. We know, Principal Watanabe said sadly, but his family cannot afford private lessons or a piano. We do what we can. The professor nodded. Then she turned back to Kenji. How would you like to study at the Tokyo Conservatory? Full scholarship. Tuition, books, instrument access, everything. You would study with the best teachers in Japan. Kenji's mouth fell open. He couldn't speak, couldn't think. The Tokyo Conservatory was like something from a dream. The greatest musicians in the country studied there. It was impossible. Too good to be true. Are you serious? Mrs. Tanaka asked, her voice shaking. Completely serious, Professor Nakamura said. I still teach one advanced class there, and I have some influence on admissions. This boy has more raw talent than students who have been training since they were 3 years old. With proper education, he could become one of the great pianists of his generation. Kenji finally found his voice. But my mother, she works 2 jobs. I can't leave her alone. Professor Nakamura smiled kindly. The conservatory is just across the city. You would attend during the day and return home each evening. And there are programs to help families like yours. We'll make sure your mother has support. Tears started rolling down Kenji's cheeks. He couldn't stop them. All his life he had dreamed of playing piano, really playing, not just on cardboard, and now this stranger was offering him everything he had ever wanted. Mrs. Tanaka was crying too. She hugged Kenji again, laughing and crying at the same time. Other teachers gathered around, congratulating him. Students cheered. Even people from Sakura Academy were clapping and smiling. But Professor Nakamura wasn't finished. She turned to Takeshi, who had been watching everything with wide eyes. Young man, what you did today was cruel, but your apology was genuine. That takes courage. She paused. Your family has money. Kenji's family does not. But Kenji has something money cannot buy. Perhaps you both have something to learn from each other. Takeshi nodded, unable to speak. He looked at Kenji with new eyes, seeing him not as someone to mock, but as someone extraordinary. The professor pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to Mrs. Tanaka. Please have Kenji's mother contact me this week. We'll arrange everything. But first, she looked at Kenji. I have one question. Why Chopin's Nocturne? Why that piece? Kenji wiped his eyes. My father used to hum it when he worked. He didn't know what it was called, but I found it in a book at the library. When I play it, I feel like he's still here with me. Professor Nakamura's expression softened. Your father would be very proud. Music has power because it connects us to the people we love even when they're gone. You understand that already. That's why you'll be great. The rest of the festival passed in a blur. People kept coming up to Kenji, wanting to talk to him, to congratulate him. The story spread quickly. By the end of the day, everyone at both schools knew about the boy who had played the broken piano. When the festival ended and students started going home, Kenji walked out into the evening air. His mind was spinning with everything that had happened. This morning, he had been nobody, just a poor kid who dreamed too big. Now he had a scholarship to the best music school in Japan. His life had changed in a single afternoon. But the best part was still ahead. He couldn't wait to get home and tell his mother. He ran most of the way, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. When he reached their small apartment building, he took the stairs 2 at a time. His mother was home early for once, cooking dinner in their tiny kitchen. When she saw his face, she immediately knew something had happened. Mom, Kenji said, out of breath and grinning. "Mom, you won't believe what happened today." And as he told her the story, as he watched her face move from confusion to disbelief to joy, as he saw tears stream down her tired cheeks, Kenji realized something important. The broken piano hadn't broken him. It had revealed who he truly was. Sometimes the hardest moments in life are actually gifts in disguise, showing us strength we didn't know we had. 3 days after the festival, Kenji's mother sat across from Professor Nakamura in a small cafe near the conservatory. She had taken time off work, something she rarely did, and wore her best dress. Her hands shook slightly as she held her teacup, still unable to believe this was really happening. "Your son is remarkable," Professor Nakamura said warmly. "In 40 years of teaching, I've seen many talented children. But what Kenji did with that broken piano showed something beyond technique. It showed soul, understanding, the kind of musicality that cannot be taught." Kenji's mother wiped her eyes. His father would have been so happy. He always believed Kenji was special, even when he was very small. He saved money for a keyboard, even when we needed it for other things. Her voice cracked. "I felt like I failed my son when we had to sell it." "You didn't fail him," the professor said firmly. "You kept him fed. You kept a roof over his head. You taught him to be kind despite hardship. Those things matter more than any instrument. And look what he achieved even without one. Imagine what he'll do now with proper training." They spent the next hour discussing the scholarship, the schedule, and the support programs available. The conservatory would provide everything. Access to practice rooms with grand pianos, weekly lessons with master teachers, music theory classes, performance opportunities, even a small stipend to help with transportation and meals. When Kenji's mother finally left the cafe, she felt like she was walking on air. For the first time since her husband died, she had hope, real hope, not just for survival but for something beautiful. The following Monday, Kenji started at the conservatory. He wore his regular school uniform because they didn't have money for the conservatory's uniform yet, but nobody seemed to care. The other students had heard about him. The story of the broken piano had spread beyond the schools, shared on social media and local news. Some people were calling him the miracle boy. Kenji felt awkward with all the attention. He was just a kid who loved music. But when he walked into the practice room and saw the grand piano waiting for him, everything else faded away. He sat at the bench, placed his fingers on the keys, and played. This time every key worked. Every note was perfectly in tune. The sound was rich and full like liquid gold. He played for 2 hours straight, making up for all the years of silence. His fingers flew across the keys, playing every piece he had memorized on his cardboard piano. It felt like flying, like being freed from a cage he hadn't known he was in. Professor Nakamura stopped by to listen. She stood in the doorway, not interrupting, just watching and smiling. When Kenji finally finished, exhausted and happy, she applauded softly. "You're home now," she said simply. "This is where you belong." The weeks turned into months. Kenji threw himself into his studies with fierce dedication. He practiced 4 hours every day after regular school, often staying late into the evening. His technique improved rapidly under expert guidance. He learned music theory, composition, and performance. But more than that, he learned to trust his gift. His mother worried he was working too hard, but Kenji was happier than she had ever seen him. He would come home late, tired but glowing, and tell her about what he had learned. Sometimes he would play pieces on his old cardboard piano before bed, just for old time's sake. It reminded him of where he came from. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening. Takeshi had kept thinking about what Professor Nakamura had said about learning from each other. One afternoon, he showed up at Kenji's school looking nervous. "Can we talk?" Takeshi asked. They sat on a bench in the schoolyard. For a while, neither spoke. Then Takeshi said, "I told my father what I did, what really happened at the festival. He was disappointed in me." He paused, but then he asked me what I was going to do about it. "Just saying sorry wasn't enough." "You already apologized," Kenji said. "That was enough." "No, it wasn't," Takeshi insisted. "I was thinking about all the other kids like you. Kids who have talent but no money for lessons or instruments. My father has money. We should do something with it. Something that matters." Over the next few weeks, Takeshi and his father worked on an idea. They talked to Professor Nakamura, to school principals, to music teachers across the city. And slowly, a plan came together. 6 months after the cultural festival, they announced the Harmony Foundation. It was a non-profit organization that would provide free instruments and music lessons to children from low-income families. Takeshi's father donated a large sum to start it, but they also raised money from other donors who were moved by Kenji's story. The foundation's logo was simple: a broken piano key being repaired, symbolizing how damaged things could be made whole again. The tagline read, "Every child deserves to make music." Kenji was asked to perform at the foundation's launch event. It was held in a real concert hall with hundreds of people in attendance. He had never played for such a large audience before, and he was terrified. But when he walked on stage and saw his mother in the front row, tears of pride streaming down her face, his fear melted away. He sat at the beautiful concert grand piano and began to play. Not Chopin this time, but an original composition. He had been working on it for months, trying to capture everything he had felt during those years of practicing on cardboard. The loneliness, the hope, the love for his father, the gratitude for his mother, the unexpected friendship with Takeshi. He called it Song for a Broken Piano. The piece started soft and sad, like a memory of loss. Then it grew stronger, more hopeful, incorporating the Japanese folk melodies his grandmother had taught him. There were moments of discord, representing the broken keys, but those moments resolved into harmony, showing how imperfection could become beauty. The ending was triumphant and gentle at the same time, like sunrise after a long night. When the last note faded, the audience sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then they rose to their feet, applauding so loudly the sound seemed to shake the walls. Kenji stood and bowed, just as Professor Nakamura had taught him. But he wasn't thinking about the applause. He was thinking about how far he had come. From a cardboard piano in a tiny apartment to a concert hall stage. After the performance, people swarmed around him. Reporters asked questions. Musicians congratulated him. But the moment that mattered most was when Takeshi approached. "Thank you," Takeshi said quietly, "for forgiving me. For inspiring this foundation. You changed my life too, you know." "We changed each other," Kenji replied, and he meant it. 5 years passed. Kenji continued his studies at the conservatory, and his reputation grew. He won competitions and performed in recitals. Music critics began calling him a prodigy, destined for greatness. But he never forgot where he started. The Harmony Foundation flourished. Hundreds of children received instruments and lessons. Many of them were talented kids who had been waiting for a chance, just like Kenji once had. Some went on to music schools. Others just enjoyed playing for the love of it. All of them learned that circumstances don't define potential. The broken piano from that day at the festival was never thrown away. Instead, the foundation restored it carefully, fixing the missing keys and tuning the strings. But they left one key deliberately unchanged, a single out-of-tune key as a reminder that perfection isn't necessary for beauty, that broken things can still make music, that sometimes our biggest challenges become our greatest gifts. The piano now sits in the foundation's headquarters, where children come for lessons. A small plaque beneath it reads, "This piano was played by an 8-year-old boy who had nothing but a dream. He showed us that music doesn't live in instruments, it lives in hearts." Kenji visits sometimes between his own performances and studies. He'll sit at that piano and play a few notes, always including that one out-of-tune key. It makes him smile, remembering the scared little boy he used to be and the person he had become. His mother stopped working 2 jobs. The foundation hired her to help run their programs, coordinating instrument donations and student applications. She found purpose in helping other families like theirs. Every child who received an instrument felt like honoring her husband's memory. And sometimes, late at night in their apartment that's a little bigger now but still modest, Kenji pulls out his old cardboard piano. It's worn and faded, the drawn keys barely visible anymore, but he keeps it in his room framed on the wall, because it reminds him that music was never about having the best instrument or the perfect circumstances. It was about passion, persistence, the courage to play even when the piano is broken, the faith to practice even when the keys are just drawings on cardboard. His father had been right all along. The real music comes from the heart. Everything else is just a tool. And on quiet nights when Kenji plays his beautiful grand piano that the conservatory eventually gave him to keep at home, he swears he can hear his father humming along. That old Chopin melody, The one that started everything, floating through the air like a blessing, like a promise kept. The boy who practiced on cardboard had become a musician who inspired thousands. But more importantly, he had shown the world something profound. That talent can bloom anywhere. That kindness can transform cruelty. That broken things and broken people can create the most beautiful music of all. And every time someone asks Kenji about his success, about how he overcame poverty and loss to achieve his dreams, he gives the same answer. I just played the piano I had, and I never stopped believing in the music.